Welcome to Fire University. This is a podcast dedicated to fire ecology and management within the Natural Resource University Podcast Network. My name is Dr. Marcus Lashley. I'm a wildlife biologist, an assistant professor of disturbance ecology at the University of Florida, and a lifelong hunter that's passionate about wildlife conservation and management. In this podcast, I will interview scientists and professionals not only on the latest research in fire ecology, but also about their experiences, in hopes that you as the listeners can learn why fire ecology is important and also how you can use it to meet your natural resource management goals. So let's get to the burning questions in Fire University. Hey everybody, welcome back to Fire University. We've got another episode for Turkey Week, and today we have Ryan Basinger from Westervelt. Ryan, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I know we've known each other for more than a decade, I guess now, and we have shared a lot of things in life, like where we grew up. We grew up right across the river from each other, and then shared a master's lab with Craig Harper at the University of Tennessee. But it's good to see you. I hadn't seen you in quite a while.
You too. Thanks for having me on, Marcus.
Yeah. Well, I thought you would be a really good person to get on because I hadn't caught up with you in a while, and I thought that'd be fun. But also, I know that you're really passionate about turkeys, and you have a lot of experience with prescribed fire in particular. So, thought it'd be really fun to talk shop with you.
Yeah, it's good timing. Good timing. We kind of getting things cranked up. We've got some youth seasons about to come in. In some surrounding states that we're going to try to get my middle daughter, her first bird this year. She's fired up, and we've been burning some woods and kind of getting our dormant season burns in the best we can, working through some of this weather, this unstable weather we've had here recently. But we've had some pretty good burning weather in Alabama this year for the most part.
Yeah, well, that's good news. I know I've had people sending me messages and tagging me and stuff like that are, setting stuff on fire in Alabama. And seems like it's been a pretty good year. Been several days where there's a bunch of smoke plumes in there.
Yeah, I walked outside my office yesterday and I could see 3 different burns going off in the distance. So it's kind of made me a little anxious to try to get my last few tracks burned, before we start losing some weather. It's going in full force right now for sure.
Yeah. You're talking about you're taking your middle daughter to get her first bird. I can't wait for that. I've been just chomping at the bit. Mine's not quite old enough yet, my first one, but this year I took her out and right across the river from you down there in Belmont. I took her out and she just sat in the stand with me, in a deer stand, this past Christmas break. And I mean, it was just like you wrote it in the book, how it was supposed to be. A mature buck, walked out 50 yards from us about 5 minutes after we got into the stand and just, pranced around, and it just blew her away. And I could just see the light. She's been really outdoorsy for the last few years growing up. But that was the first time where I really saw that she might have that, that same thing, that same passion. So I'm really curious to see if she develops that as well. But getting her on a turkey gobbling, that really separates you. Yeah. It really separates out the passionate lifelong hunter from those that aren't. If you can't get into a turkey gobbling in your face, it's a pretty good tell.
Yeah, it's definitely it tests your the generosity of a true turkey hunter. It's hard for a diehard to even want to give up a bird for his own child sometimes. You got to get in a different. Yeah. You got to get out of that kill mode that you've been in, pre-kids, and kind of slow it down and getting back. And I can say it's so much more rewarding. My middle daughter is 10, and she has really loves to go hunting with me, and she's killed 2 stud bucks so far, and she killed her first one. Both of them are 5+ year old bucks, and mature deer. And she's kind of got that, I guess, just being around me and growing up around, folks in our circles, she's not interested in shooting a small buck. She understands, population management and all that. So it's been a lot of fun watching her get excited about all that. So it's lit a new fire in me, because I wasn't deer hunting as much as I used to, because I feel like I manage deer every day at some level in my career. So it just kind of, the passion kind of to deer hunt, is kind of waned a little bit. So that's kind of brought it back around at a different level that I've really enjoyed. So it's been a lot of fun. So she's been a part of one turkey kill, but she hadn't pulled the trigger yet. So,
did it get her excited? That's the
real
question.
She carried him. She carried him out. So that was a lot of fun watching a 30-pound, 10-year-old girl, or she was 8 at the time, I think. So, or no, I say 30 pounds. My youngest is 30, but anyway, carrying a bird half her size, up a hill. It's, a lot of fun watching her, flounder around with that.
Yeah. That sounds like you're giving her all the opportunity to love it. Yeah. Well, so I guess if we get on to business, so I know that you've got a ton of experience with turkeys. You even did your master's research, right? Was on forest management. You did a lot of things with turkeys during that work, didn't you?
Yeah, we Dr. Harper and I, as you mentioned earlier, we looked at some different silvicultural techniques in the mountains and upland hardwood stands, looking at different levels of thinning intensity, thinning with burning, burning alone. So looking at the impacts of, just common forest management practices on habitat for turkeys, whether it was, acorn production, soft mass production in the summer and fall, invertebrate abundance and availability, nesting habitat, just looking at it at every level, what these practices, do for turkeys and turkey habitat. So that was a pretty fun project to be a part of.
Yeah, I bet. I know my work with them was pretty similar, and some of the plots may have even been the same. It was just, several years after you. But yeah, I was focused on deer, but I was working alongside another student who was doing turkey stuff, and we did all that together. But some of the same sort of work. So did you take the job with Westervelt as soon as you got done with the master's? So
yeah, pretty much. I actually had I worked with the Corps of Engineers for about a year.
Okay.
After I finished up at Tennessee, mainly to fulfill a co-op agreement that I had with them when I was an undergraduate. So I owed them some time. And then after that, I went right with Westervelt. So I've been with Westervelt probably 16 years, I think.
Oh, wow.
This will be the 17th year I've been with the Westervelt company.
Yeah. So you've worked, I guess, in multiple capacities with, different kinds of landowners, and you've been a part of the research, obviously, at the beginning, but now you've transitioned more to working with a lot of private landowners. So when you're working with those landowners, I guess, what do you think, I guess, the people that you have worked with over the years, what generally is driving their decision making?
Most of the landowners that I've worked with, their primary interest is to make their hunting better. I would say that's the kind of underlying objective for a lot of the landowners. They want to have a better overall recreational outdoor experience with whatever season happens to be in, whether it's a lot of it's been centered around deer management, and then turkeys and doves, waterfowl management opportunities, duck hunting, and so really a lot of these recreational landowners were, just trying to maximize their outdoor experience and taking advantage of the different seasons that we have, throughout the year to, I guess, widen that window of opportunity to enjoy their property. So, and then in between all those seasons, you've got all the management practices that are being implemented to try to facilitate that enjoyment of their property.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, when we were talking before we went on the air, you said that a term, I think you said intensively managed properties. Is that what you said?
Yeah,
something like that. What do you mean, like when you're talking about these landowners, these recreational landowners, and you're saying they're intensively managing? Could you describe what that means, I guess?
Yeah, a lot of them, Marcus, would, they would have either a wildlife biologist or a full-time property manager, caretaker, or staff, on the property. A lot of the properties are larger properties. I'd say, 1,000+ acres. And so they're managed in a way, like I mentioned, 90% of them were really more focused on deer, trying to improve the deer population to level to promote, trophy buck harvest opportunities and what have you. So they would, it's really a year-round thing. It's timber management practices, whether it's, creating cover, browse, or you're doing things, managing timbers from a silvicultural standpoint, for, generate revenue, whatever. So there's all that going on. We're, managing the timber, with other techniques such as through herbicide prescriptions to try to promote wildlife habitat that way. Burning, if we've got, habitats that we can burn. Food plot management, with a lot of these properties where, may have, 5 to 20% of the property in food plots, agricultural crops. So there's, as year-round management is needed on those, whether, both fall and summer plantings, perennial crops that you're, managing throughout the year. So, managing stands, you might have, some of these properties may have 50, 60 stands to maintain, shoot houses or lock-ons, supplemental feeding programs. They're, a lot of these properties are feeding, high protein feed year round. So, there's something, planting dove fields, spraying dove fields, drawing down waterfowl impoundment. So you name it, there's something going on all the time. So from an intensity standpoint, that's about as intense as you can get. And then you mix in deer season. So in a lot of states, you may have a deer season that lasts from November to February.
Right.
So some of these tracts you may be having to harvest 50 to 100 deer off of a year, to knock the top off from all the hard work you're putting into them and making things better so you can remove more. So
yeah.
So it's got
at that level, it almost becomes a real problem, right? It's like,
it is a problem.
How are we going to get 100 deer removed?
Yeah.
It's hard to accomplish that unless you have a lot of people, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. But yeah, it's, kind of every track, every property is unique, and, but I would say that a lot of them have that same common goal, though, is, man, we want we want to have a great hunting experience, and we want our family and friends or customers or whoever to enjoy. We want to bring them out here and just have them have the hunt of their life.
Yeah.
So, whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
So
you made me think about something different. When you talk to people, any hunter, I mean, I would say that I'm probably biased in this, but the turkey hunting community is a very passionate group of people, and it's right. I haven't met many other groups that rival it, at least consistently among every single one. I mean, it's when you talk to someone who grew up or has gotten really into turkey hunting, it's always like, I posted something the other day. I mean, it's like poetic, when you describe your experiences and why it's made you love what you do and why you've gone through your entire career. I mean, you've developed your whole life around it and career around that passion. But when I talk to people like yourself, they're working with lots of landowners, and I know your role has changed over the years, and you don't necessarily do that as much anymore. But when I talk to folks that work with lots of people, it seems like the management decisions, when they are wildlife focused, are often centered on deer or quail. I don't hear that, people say turkeys that often. Do you think that, I mean, are there landowners out there that are doing all these things? Like they're making all their decisions based on turkeys, and then the other things are just kind of benefits that come with it? Like it seems like that happens with deer a lot. But.
Yeah, I think, you hit on, an important point there is their turkeys, there's just always that mindset that, whatever I'm doing for deer, turkeys are going to be benefiting from.
Mm-hmm.
So there wasn't an intentional component to, for managing turkeys. You just assumed they were benefiting the same way that whatever else you were managing for. And that's a valid point, because turkeys are so adaptable. They just, they utilize so many different things, and they can kind of make do. But we've kind of, got to, and I feel like we've probably gotten to a point where I don't want to say that we're, deer hunters are kind of, maybe they're getting a little more complacent or whatever, but there seems to be a little more shift on the mindset a little bit when it comes to managing for turkeys. I think people are starting to see, okay, well, there's new things at play here that are impacting turkey populations that we didn't consider back in the day or whatever. And how are we going to address them? Because I think you start to see it when, as turkey populations in many parts of the South or country kind of have been kind of going through some difficult, challenging times. That people were just not used to seeing that.
Yeah.
And so it kind of made people step back and say, hey, what's going on here? I'm not really doing anything different, but I don't see as many turkeys as I used to, or I don't hear as many turkeys gobbling as I used to.
Right.
So it kind of shifted the focus a little bit. And I've seen, just being in the hunting lease market and all that, a shift in demand for hunting land. That you see a lot more people leasing land for turkeys than you used to. Used to you might have a deer hunting club that had a turkey member, that helped pay the bills and all that, and it was a symbiotic relationship. But now you see somebody leasing a tract to turkey hunt, and they find them a deer hunting member. So it's kind of a lot. It's the roles have kind of reversed, and
that's what we've been doing all along, Ron.
So, people are catching on, man.
I know.
It's not fun, So finding good places to turkey hunt, or it's not like it used to be. Man, it's a tough market out there now. So, but yeah, I think I'm finding more and more. I'd say in the last 5 years, of more landowners are trying to do things specifically for turkeys.
Yeah.
Than I've noticed before that.
Well, maybe I'll get your opinion on it. You're talking about how widely adaptable turkeys are. Well, I mean, deer are just as or more adaptable. And if people focused on doing things for turkeys, are they going to just get the deer? Like, is that just going to take care of itself as well? I mean, what are they going to lose from that?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say, depending on, the management, as far the level of tolerance in terms of where you could achieve what you could achieve with your deer herd, I wouldn't really think that you would have much difference if you flip flop those that mindset. The only thing I would say is that you might have differently is say you have say you live in an area that's pine dominated, and a lot of your management and your neighbors' management is related to managing pine plantations or natural pine stands or whatever. So your primary management regime is going to be herbicides and burning for the most part, and strip disking or lanes and all that kind of stuff. Try to keep that connectivity, and
Sure.
So if I'm managing if I'm really trying to focus on turkeys, I'm gonna be burning more frequently. My fire return there was gonna be a little more frequent than if I'm trying to focus more on deer. So you may give up a little bit of that, 3-4 year old rough that would be good for deer,
right?
Better for deer than that 1 or 2 year old burn stand. You know what I mean? So
it's just
that may be something.
Yeah, the cover aspect that you're getting out of it.
Yeah.
So, but if if you think about turkeys, and what you would gain from that, I mean, what are you gaining? I guess if you just make that simple switch, we have two species that are relatively general, at least relative, like quail or something. But you have what seems like a subtle change in mindset, but it could make a big difference, I guess. And that's what I'm asking you directly is how would that make a difference for the turkey? Like if you actually, like what you just said, you go to more frequent burning, and that maybe reduces some of the cover for deer, but what do you gain from the turkeys aspect?
Yeah, I think, from independent on, it's kind of a broad, I'm trying to paint it with a broad brush, but in general, I think what you're gaining from a turkey perspective is that more open structure. Independent on where you are in the country, whether that's your limiting factor or not. So
sure.
I'm just kind of speaking from just say my area, for example.
Right. Well, that's what I'm asking you about. So I know you can't you can't say something that applies to every situation everywhere.
Yeah. So just to give you an example, in my area that's, heavily managed, intensively managed for pine plantations. So, short rotation pine plantations, if I might add. So
what is a short rotation, just real quick?
So you may 25 years.
Okay.
So you may have one thinning in there. So, and so you may, have an opportunity to burn a couple of times, and then you're starting over. So one in a lot of SMZs or streamside management zones, a lot of those have been, a lot of these areas have had maybe 3-4 rotations, 5 rotations, depending on how far back you want to go.
Yeah.
And those SMZs have been trimmed up, and so it's not a lot of open connectivity, you know. So you got everything's so fast now, and so you just got a lot of thick woods.
Yeah.
And so so one thing that we lack is just that open structure where turkeys can see, can move around, you know, and can have that connectivity to other habitats that they can utilize. And we just lost a lot of that in some of these areas. And S&Zs have gotten thinner and thicker. All that sunlight's hitting just gets real thick with brambles and brush, and
which is awesome for deer. But
yeah, that's right. So having more open structure, more frequent fire return intervals, maybe managing a little bit longer rotation, you know, where you can go in and implement some more fire and keep that open structure, and you're in the stands more disturbance wise. You're putting in more fire breaks. You're creating more forb communities and grass communities in those fire breaks, and just adding more over time and planting fire breaks and you know, perennial clover, whatever. You just got all these other little pieces to create these little small openings in a patchwork across the property. If you're burning more, you're in there more, you're doing stuff. So it and you know, turkeys can see predators better. So it's you know, it's just, I think that's what turkeys gains more from that approach.
Yeah, that makes sense. So given your experience, and you know, you're talking about the short rotation pines, I get asked about this kind of stuff a lot, and I kind of wanted to take some of the things that I get asked a lot and just let you tell us about it, because you have so much experience doing stuff like this, especially related to turkeys. So in a short rotation pine scenario where you got, you know, this 25-year rotation, I guess starting with planting, what are turkeys using it for, and when would they stop using it? In terms of, if we just planted the trees, you know, now go what in that stand? How does that?
Yeah. Well, how long turkeys will use that clear cut that's now a new plantation is going to depend on maybe what your site prep practices were in terms of competition control. So some of those factors would play into it, and also maybe what species you planted, or if you've got improved genetics. You know, how long is it going to be before it gets to a stage to where turkeys use it less?
Yeah.
So generally, maybe about 2 to 3 years is when they'll kind of stop. You know, they just won't use it as much.
Kind of like the stand burn stand, because like a similar track. It just kind of gets too thick.
Yeah, that's right. That's when you want to put that fire back in there, right?
Yeah.
But you're not going to do that in a young 4-year-old loblolly plantation, you know, or something, you know. So and like we was talking about planting longleaf, you know, the species that we're, you know, managing is going to impact, you know, that window of availability, you know, early on. But like, say, for example, we'll just stick with loblolly. And so after a couple, say you have a intensive site prep treatment, so it's going to kind of keep that competition at bay for another maybe year. But then you're planting you know, the pines are getting all the nutrients instead of your, you know, competition.
Yeah.
And they're going to be shooting up, and all of a sudden they start, you know, canopies start closing. It gets real thick, impenetrable for turkeys. And then really all you've got is some, you know, turkeys using the edges of that for nesting and maybe some escape cover from time to time. But by and large, that's a block of land that's not being utilized, and is probably going to hinder you for, depending on the adjacent habitat types and the scale of that, you know, how many acres it's that could. So it's probably, you know, it's going to be unusable for, and, you know, once a pine, you know, a loblolly plantation gets maybe 10 10 or 11 years old, it'll start to, we talked about the canopy closure and shading effect. So I think it'll clean it up underneath it. And then turkeys will start kind of moving back in a little bit once you start, particularly in the winter time when everything loses its leaves and all that. So, it opens up in there. So after about, 11 or 12 years, depending on the site quality and productivity, it'll open back up. Turkeys start using it a little bit more. So, and they kind of like those things, just kind of that, what I call the pre-thinning stage, right before you get ready to thin it,
So it's kind of,
so you got
that visibility that you were talking about. I mean, what are they using it for? Is that like, are they just loafing around in there? Are they foraging in there or what?
There's not a whole lot in there for turkeys, at that stage. I think it's just,
in terms of food, you mean? Or?
Yeah, in terms of food, it's mostly, pine needles on the forest floors, and you got a few might have some beauty berry or something that's dropped some berries or something, but in terms of total food availability, it's pretty low. Just not getting any sunlight in there, so pines have kind of choked everything out. So you just got some open structure in there where they can just kind of loaf, like you said.
Yeah. Okay. So, but they're still the trees are too small for them to roost in or anything like that either.
Yeah.
So, okay. Well, so we're 10, 12 years after you've planted the 1-year-old seedlings. And then,
so you've lost about 10 years.
Yeah.
Right of really little benefit, in terms of, turkey usable space in there. So.
Okay. So then you would, I guess, sort of have that window where they're using it, and then you would go to the first thin.
And really, generally? You can start, even before you thin it, you can start running some really low intensity fire through there. In an unthinned plantation. So it's, like I said, it's just going to open it up a little bit more and clean it up a little bit before you thin it. But it may impact, some natural openings in there or edges where it can get a little sunlight, or a road goes through the middle of it. So you get a little bit of, so you could start slowly improving it before you thin it.
You're saying low intensity. That's just because I guess the pines. What size are they at that point?
Yeah, so you wouldn't want it to get a really hot fire in there because you could get some ground scorch and mortality and all that. So you'd want just let a little slow backing fire, let it creep through there at night or whatever. You're just talking about flame heights less than a foot. Just let it kind of creep through there. And then you thin it, like you're getting to, and maybe depending on the site quality, may thin it at 13, 14, 15 years old. And then that creates, obviously, we've got something different. We've got that sunlight coming in and create a lot of space in the canopy, and kind of taken out some of those trees and sold them, and now we're starting to get things kind of moving a little more quickly in terms of how they can impact turkey populations once we thin it. So
okay. So then, basically, what you're saying when you get to that thinning, you're releasing sunlight. That was the limiting resource, limiting the response to fire. So you'll get a big vegetation response to the fire in that case.
That's right. So you get, depending on the time of year you thin it, it's going to kind of influence what species are responding. When you get that ground disturbance from the logging equipment, and the influx of sunlight. So then you kind of, unless you have past history with those areas, or you kind of you're in a wait and see mode to see kind of how it's going to respond in terms of the species composition and structure, and see what comes back. So and then you kind of assess that and go from there, what you need to do, try to manipulate that.
So basically after that thin so at you said 15 years, we'll just say to make it easy, 15 years you thin, then you're thinking if you're managing for turkeys, maybe returning fire to that stand from every other year or every 3 years or something like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All the way, I guess, for the next decade for your 20, till you're at 25.
Yeah. Or I would say at least, if that's going to be your rotation length, if it's 25 years old roughly. So yeah, you're looking at being able to burn it. If you stick to the plan every 2 to 3 years, you might get, 4 or 5 fires in there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so that would be ideal, but I obviously, you may have to wait a year or two after you thin to accumulate enough fuel, after that ground disturbance. So you may be losing a little bit of time there. So, so you probably reasonably expect to get 3 or 4 fires in there anyway. So,
okay. I think that's a good timeline. So now I want to think about it when you change your objectives a little bit, because I get asked about this all the time. There are a lot of people that have they're inheriting or they're buying land that already has a young pine plantation that's just been planted, and they really just don't care about the trees. Like it's just, they want it to be space for turkeys. So when it sounded like the first time, if your main objective was to grow loblolly pine timber, you go through that process, and you might, if you have a secondary objective of deer and turkeys, or specifically turkeys, you'd introduce fire to that stand. Not necessarily would you do that if you don't have that objective. Stop me if I'm mischaracterizing what you're saying. But it sounded like you wouldn't introduce fire until at least a decade after you planted, maybe 12 years, right?
Yeah, that's right. If it's loblolly.
Yeah, if it's loblolly. How would that change if it's longleaf?
Well, you could burn, pretty much throughout the life of the stand.
Starting from
as long as you got fuel.
Yeah. And I guess
and there are time periods that are sensitive, that you'd need to consider in some of those earlier stages, when they're candling and things of that nature. So, but those can all be worked around. So during that sensitive stage, but you got a little more burning flexibility throughout the life of the stand.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what if you're in this situation where you've gotten this young pine plantation of loblolly, and you don't care about the timber at all. I mean, a lot of the landowners, they don't own the land for income. They might like to have a little income and don't want to throw away money necessarily, but they really care about turkeys. How could you change the way that you're managing that stand in terms of the fire use in particular to increase, from the 15 of the 25 that you just talked about? Could we make that turkey habitat for more of that?
I think there are certainly ways to do that. One thing that I might consider would be like, what are the surrounding habitat types, and what role is that stand playing in, hindering or helping, would it provide a good, habitat type in terms of nesting habitat for a period of time that may be lacking somewhere else on the property, or how big the stand is? Can you break it up to try to, say, is it a 300 acre block of the same age timber? And if you're not necessarily interested in intensively managing the timber, maximizing revenue from it, maybe as soon as some of the stand reaches pulpwood size, instead of thinning it or whatever, maybe you go in and clear cut a section of it and go ahead and try to start staggering the rotation through that stand and try to diversify in that stand.
Yeah.
So maybe you do that, and then maybe you go and install long linear food plots in it, or roads, or daylight roads, or create lanes traversing through. That's one thing that you could really hurts populations, is just cutting that connectivity off. You know, I see it all the time where somebody go in there, cut a big chunk of woods out, and then all of a sudden turkeys can't, get to the roosting areas anymore, just because it gets so thick they can't even access them to roost those normal roosting areas. So say if that's your plantation, keeping that openness, lanes, travel lanes, corridors, to where they can, as soon as things start to open up and loosen up in that stand, they can get in there and start roosting in again, where you're not just completely cutting them off to habitats that they once needed.
Sure.
So does that answer your question?
I think, I was just, I know I'm asking you general questions and just mainly letting you go where you want to go with it. But that's the kind of questions we get all the time. I got an email saying, "Hey, when should I start burning my pine stands?" And it's like, well, I need a lot of context.
How much you like them?
Like, so some people are, basically as soon as you have fuel in there and it will burn, you can burn it, right? But what if you have a 5-year-old loblolly plantation? You don't care about those pines and you can't cut them, and then you introduce fire to that stand. What would you
maybe
expect?
you like fields better the next year? So.
So is that what you're going to have?
I mean, you like just the pines. So no, some of them will survive. You'll just have kind of a mosaic. Some of them will survive, and then you'll have just a patchwork of openings throughout that stand, and so you would kind of almost be creating a more natural, stand and look that, if you just let it eat and do what it's going to do, and do it again in 2 or 3 years, So, and do half of it one year and half the next year. That way, or just kind of let it go and let Mother Nature run its course through there, and let natural succession kind of help guide that process. If there are species that are responding that you like, so we're getting what we want and not getting a bunch of junk species that aren't doing us a lot of good.
That makes sense. What you were describing with it being a mosaic sounds a lot like what I'm recommending to people a lot of the time. And I'm, I don't know if you do, I'm not going to speak for you, but I certainly recommend, and it sounds like based on what you were describing, that's sort of what you're trying to do with an intensive management strategy, is to provide all of the habitat components where they're accessible to one another. Like turkeys can get around all of them, or, all the things that they need. It sounds like you're kind of generating that within the stand, given that you're, in that case, you'd be killing a bunch of your loblollies. You'd have some, but what you get from it is you'll have little patches where the loblolly does excellent, but you'll also have patches that are just an opening with no pine in it. And, the opening provides some really good stuff that you wouldn't get necessarily otherwise, unless you are intentional about it and you have logging decks or daylighted your roads or whatever to create it.
I mean, certainly if you're like me and you like turkeys more than you do pine trees, it can be advantageous.
Well, I get asked about that all the time, and I kind of say similar things to what you said. But that's the trade-off you're making is, well, you're going to lose some pine trees if you burn them that early. That doesn't mean you can't, but it's generally, if you're trying to maximize timber production, we're not, that's not what we're thinking. But it's interesting. I've also, I haven't been in this game that long, but over the past 15 years or so that I've been working with people, I've even seen a transition, it seems like, in philosophy with people, where they're more willing to do stuff like that. And they, even when you're like, well, you probably don't want to do that because you're going to negatively affect pine production. They're like, well, I don't care. Is it going to make more
Yeah,
turkeys?
that's right.
Or is it going to make more quail? You know,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's been interesting. I was, so when we're contrasting that, I guess the big difference with longleaf is that you probably won't have nearly the mortality rate of your pine that you've planted in that if you
Yeah.
have that early on burn, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you kind of keep some degree of openness within the stand throughout most of the life of that stand, at least in the earlier
longleaf
stages, So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I that's the biggest thing, the biggest difference between those two species. So just having some flexibility to do that and being able to have a little bit different habitat structure early on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. I guess in these intensive managed properties, that's the typical place that you work with. Are they using fire frequently as part of that intensive management? Would you say that's common?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah. Every one of them are that has the habitats that can that are conducive for the ones that we're not burning bottomland hardwood or wet habitats, but where and like I said, kind of by default, if you're in the South, you're going to be kind of in some pine managed areas. So a lot of people are managing for pine production, and so that's what we got to work with.
Yeah.
So yeah, the vast majority of them are burning now, seeing the value of it, and how important it is for turkeys. That's something that there's a window there where people just kind of got lazy with it, I think, and there wasn't an emphasis on burning, and I think maybe the last 10 years it's really kind of starting to pick up, and so hopefully we'll kind of carry that momentum. There's just there's so many factors that people have to deal with these days.
Sure.
Burning wise, it's just with the liability and smoke management issues that you run into, and it's really hard to do for a lot of folks, and some agencies just won't allow it, for those reasons, and so you just don't have that, that chain reaction, that where everybody's kind of, working for the same objective, but like I said, I'm encouraged that it's picked up so much like it has the last, at least probably for sure the last 5 years.
Yeah.
So
yeah, definitely.
It's been good.
Saying the same thing.
And more so down where you are, there's a lot more going on there than where I'm at now. But yeah, the small recreational landowner is burning a lot more now, for sure.
Yeah, that's good news. One thing that I know we're bouncing around for topics, but I keep thinking of things when you're talking. So we talked about on the front end, if you're that person who's just bought a piece of property, it was planted in a pine plantation, and you're not necessarily interested in that. I'd say that's pretty common, that people would buy land and they might walk into that scenario where they have a bunch of pines that they're not necessarily interested in at all. What about, so you talked about the 25-year interval. That's if you're trying to manage for timber, right? I mean, you don't have to cut them then.
Well, yeah. It really is going to be driven a lot by the timber markets in your area.
Sure.
So if you've got paper mills all around you, if you're trying to, maximize your return on that, you're going to be, growing pulpwood, so, and you're going to be trying to get a new rotation as quick as you can to get as many in as you can while we're still here, So, if you've got salt, some places have a really strong saw timber market or chicken saw. So it just really is going to be a lot of that's going to be driven by what your market is. And, but yeah, in terms of, man, I like it's not much prettier than a well managed, 35, 40, 45-year-old plantation.
Mm-hmm.
That's, just been thinned 2 or 3 times. And, basal areas, around 40, 50,
Yeah.
right in that range. And it gets burned every 2 or 3 years, man. That's
It's hard
a
to
lot
beat.
of good in that right there. So,
Yeah.
so yeah.
I personally don't see that very often outside of the quail world where people are intensively managing for quail. But that's kind of where I was trying to get you to talk about. If we have that typical 25-year-old loblolly plantation model or a 25-year rotation, excuse me, but we don't care about cutting the timber ever for in perpetuity other than to produce habitat for turkeys. So what does that look like? I guess you'd have your initial thin and then maybe you're thinning again at 23 to 25 or somewhere, give or take a few years. And then maybe how often would you be thinning? And can you basically with the recurring thinning and fire keep that in good high quality turkey habitat in perpetuity then?
Well, it sort of depends, if you've got, in terms of the thinning intensity and frequency of thinning, if you're planning on taking it out, you're extending your rotation longer, you'd want to thin less intensive. That way you're ensuring there's some wood to come in, because thinning is going to be helpful for you, in terms of, not only generating some revenue, but also helping you create that habitat.
Yeah.
And help with the pines, as well, keeping them healthy and going. Because if you're extending your rotation, it's important for you to keep the trees healthy so they're not dying out and start getting some mortality in the stand, So, yeah, you want to, depending on, what your planting rate was, how many trees were planted there on the site and how many trees per acre, and then go in and maybe if you're wanting to have a longer rotation, you would just take out fewer trees each time you go in the stand. That way you can kind of keep that periodic disturbance, like you said, maybe every 5 to 8 years, going and thin a little bit more and thin a little bit more, as long as things are going well in timber markets and logger availability. So yeah, that would be a good strategy is doing it that way. And that way you've got wood to work with. And the other option is to, thin it real hard early and just kind of let it go from there.
Just use fire from then on. And
you're just not going to get the height that you would if you had a little more, trees around it kind of pushing things up.
Yeah.
You're just going to kind of stop height growth, but to a large degree. But so yeah, you could do it that way if you wanted to.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So in that scenario, when you're talking about thinning it harder, I guess you would eventually get to this, even if you were doing it a bunch of times over the next many years. You're kind of getting down to a low basal area. Are you talking about with the heavy thing? Are you trying to go down to like a 30 or 40, or are you trying to go to, where you at?
I think I would give myself a little bit of cushion there just to account for some mortality, over time.
So you may be targeting that. You may not necessarily thin down to that in the heavy thinning, but you're accounting for some trees might die.
Yeah. Okay. I might try to stay somewhere around a 40 to 50, somewhere in that range. And that maybe give you a little bit of time to, or won't be quite so bad when you have some disease or, bugs move in or whatever. And you have some mortality in the stand. So, that'd be a good strategy.
Well, so it's really interesting. I've brought it up with a couple of other folks during Turkey Week, and because it's really resonated with me over the past several weeks. I have been kind of digging around about historical writings about turkeys, like way back, like hundreds of years ago writings.
Yeah.
And I stumbled across some stuff written by Bartram, who was one of the initial explorers that kind of mapped out where everything was in North America, and it sounds kind of like he's lamenting about it, but I can't really tell the tone from the writing. Of course, the writing's all like it's poetry, the way those folks wrote back then. But he basically was talking about turkeys lighting up the morning in every direction for hundreds of miles, and it would wake them all up. And it sounded like he was almost lamenting, like, I can't even sleep because these turkeys are screaming everywhere. And he did that at the same time that he was essentially labeling the entire landscape, at least the forested portion that wasn't associated with river bottoms. He essentially labeled it as Grand Savanna or Grand Savannah and sometimes woodland. And there's other things in there, but it was just really striking to me that he's basically talking about turkeys gobbling, and keeping everybody up for hundreds of miles in every direction. And he's describing the landscape as a savanna, which just has a few trees, similar to what you're just describing with that strategy. And I'm just envisioning having a turkey roasted and gobbling in every tree. We're starting to measure how many birds we have in terms of how many birds per tree. That's a different way of thinking.
I want that.
I was thinking, and I said it to somebody else, and they were like, "Can you imagine what it was like when there apparently was a turkey in every tree almost?" I would love to be in that scenario. So
unless he was just of the frame of mind where he was so upset. It's kind of like that dripping water faucet where it seemed like it was way worse than it was. So you don't really know what a slow drip can be a big problem by the end of the night. So
you don't know if was it just that irritating because he was just wore out and he needed to sleep.
If that dog barks one more time, so
he's embellishing a bit. There was some other stuff that was fun to read where there was some embellishment where I can't remember who was writing. I'm posting the stuff online. I have the actual authors that wrote it, and I can't remember who wrote what. But one of them was talking about how the size of the turkey it's like a foot taller than they actually are, and they were saying that it was common for them to be 35 to 40 pounds, and like all this stuff.
Sounds like a turkey hunter, Marcus.
He was definitely a big time turkey hunter, embellishing a little bit, and it was kind of funny because a couple of other writers were like, he was saying that, but that's actually bigger than it. It may have been Audubon, from the the Audubon. I think it was him that actually described the first one, and he was saying that they were way bigger. But I found a picture too of where one of the original drawings plates, that they were describing the turkey with. So it's like a picture of the turkey.
Yeah.
And it had 3 beards, It's like, that was just normal. All of them had 3 beards, I guess. So maybe they did. Hell, I don't know.
That's right.
So it's been really fun, but it's also interesting talking to folks like yourself and thinking through these strategies and what historically, there apparently back then there were turkeys in every tree, and that's what the whole landscape looked like, according to the same person who wrote what he drew on his map, which is, pretty incredible to think about. Now we're talking about trying to mimic essentially that with some of these practices if you're really trying to focus on turkeys.
Yeah. Well, there's so many other things in play now that weren't in play when Bartram was coming through, or even 20 or 30 years ago. When turkey populations were seemingly at their highest, and in the heyday, in the 90s and early 2000s, and late 80s, and so it's there's so many things that we have to deal with now, whether it's landscape changes or land use practices or predators, regulations, hunting regulations. So many things now have just muddied the water and made it really hard to kind of tease out, okay, what's having the most impact on them, and how can I adjust my management practices to, account for that. So
I think that's a great point. What is missing? That's not always the same thing everywhere. And how can you address it? Yeah. And what's missing might be, if you're a really big landowner, maybe it's all on your property, but it's more likely a multi-property thing that you need to look at.
Yeah. And that's what, to me, probably more than deer, and others, but the way turkeys, you really got to get outside your property, and see what's going on, and factor that in, because it's, their home ranges are so much larger, and when you take out, buck excursions anyway, but there's so many other factors related to turkeys and the land use practices that can really help you or hurt you, that are out of your control. It's a little bit different taking a deer population that, on your property, depending on the size, and really kind of doing some things, and then, what turkeys is different.
Yeah. It's influence at much larger scale, most of the time larger than the scale that you have influence over.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's a good point. Well, I think that was a great discussion, and I always like to kind of close with, do you have any take home messages or something that you think folks ought to know if they're interested in turkeys and managing turkeys, or, fire or whatever?
Yeah. And I'm kind of speaking for what I'm the kind of the challenges that I face more of. So it may not apply to you or wherever your property is, but for me, the biggest thing is maintaining that connectivity to all the habitats that you can on the property, and it may be through a fire break or a sendero, lane, corridor, wide roadsides. That's the thing with turkeys. If you go spend time on properties that have lots of birds consistently, and kind of take out all the noise going on around them that they can't control, but the ones that are most successful they're frequently managing the ground cover on their property with fire and disturbance, and thinning, and different and openings, fire breaks, wide roadsides. Keep those wide roadsides they can
phenomenal,
they can be gold.
Yeah.
Especially when you got a young plantation in the mix now, keeping those roosting areas intact, wide SMZs, all that to say is, don't box turkeys in, or they'll rarely get there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? From other properties, or box them out, and, I see a lot of, landowners, kind of play defense. They try to, cut long property lines and stuff to try to stop turkeys from, getting on their neighbors and whatnot. So keep it thick, So, but man, that can help you or hurt you. When you start cutting turkeys off and their normal travel patterns and hitting these drains and bottoms, and I mean, you can really create just a little island if you're not careful, and you're not going to consistently have birds. You'll have occasionally, but there won't be that consistency.
Right. Well, I think that's a good point. If you're taking a strategy and trying to keep them from having that big home range, essentially is what you're saying, that could backfire, and they could just stop using it because it's not big enough and they're not connected to all the things they need, and you've cut them off. So you've essentially created, you don't have enough for them. So they just don't use it because they don't have that connectivity. It's good way to think about it.
Yeah, in my neck of the woods, connectivity is the word. I mean, having that connectivity, and more fire breaks that you can. That's just creating that open structure through there. Turkeys, man, they just like you said, shrinks where they gotta go get what they need.
Yeah. So keeping them off your neighbors may be just improving conditions rather than trying to The approach isn't to stop them from going where they, going somewhere else. It's to make sure they don't need to.
Yeah, that's right.
So, okay. Any other good take home points? That was a pretty strong one, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it's, the other thing is, I don't know what the answer is to the predator side of it, but I know it's not putting corn out, trying to manage deer and turkeys with feeders and feeding and all that. It's just, I don't know how we're going to address that part of it. So we're making things better for things that eat turkeys. So I would seriously consider, your artificial management practices and how they're impacting positively or negatively your turkey and predator populations for sure.
Yeah.
So it just seems to be, that we've just got that, we're kind of in that hunting culture shift to, feeders and cameras and guns, and that's kind of how we do things now, it seems like. And so I don't know what the answer is to that.
Right.
But,
yeah. Well, certainly something that needs to be thought about because of the widespread use of the practices. And, there are plenty of people that are very worried about predation on turkeys.
Yeah.
And, certainly something we need to be thinking about. I talk about it a lot, and we've talked about it today. One thing is to make sure turkeys have somewhere they don't get, that they can hide.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's also the other aspect of that is, making sure that you're not subsidizing the predator population.
Right. That's right. So
cool.
We really don't know. So
yeah. Well, I really appreciate you taking time to come on the show. It was real fun talking to you. We need to catch up more often.
Absolutely.
Well, one last thing, if people want to follow up with you and have questions or just want to find you, how can they do that?
Yeah, they can email me at rbasinger@westervelt.com. And that's RBASINGER at Westervelt, WSTERVELT.
Okay.
So
We'll link that in the show notes for folks that are interested, and they'll have direct access to it if they like. So, well, it's been really fun. I sure appreciate it.
Yeah, man, I enjoyed it, Marcus. I appreciate you reaching out.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks everybody for listening in. We really appreciate it. Fire University is part of the Natural Resource University podcast network, funded by the Renewable Resources Extension Act. If you like what you heard today in this episode, please follow us on all the social media platforms at UF Deer Lab.